Hello and welcome to another edition of Another Book Review. This week I'll be reviewing Matt Ruff's novel Lovecraft Country. Talk a little bit about the author, talk about a brief overview of the plot, go into what I liked about the book, what I didn't like about the book, finish off with what I'll be reading for next time. Matt Ruff is a novelist who's been publishing since the late 1980s. He's published in a fairly wide variety of genres, everything from alternative fiction to fantasy. This novel, Lovecraft Country, is probably best described as horror. This is, I think, his best-known work at this point. He wrote an earlier novel called Mirage, which is kind of an alternative history about 9/11 that did get some buzz around it. I haven't read that. This is the first of his stuff that I have read. So this Lovecraft Country is about a large extended family in Chicago that becomes intertwined with essentially a Lovecraftian cult, and kind of the book is several short stories essentially kind of describing the battle between these two groups. The family in Chicago, I should note, is African American. That becomes important as the novel goes along, and the novel in a lot of ways is really a response to a lot of Lovecraft stuff, and that it talks about racism being horrifying in its own right. The novel takes place in, I believe, 1954. One of the main characters has just gotten back from the Korean War. And that really is the novel without giving anything away. It's just kind of the struggle of this family as its world kind of becomes turned upside down as this a leader, I guess, of a cult kind of invades their life. Without going into spoilers, that's what it is. And so that I thought was an interesting hook. I think one of the things I liked about the book, the first chapter, it's because it is broken down into different chapters. The first chapter really kicks off the book in a really interesting way. I think the best character of the entire book is the character who is returning from the Korean War, and kind of each chapter is set around different characters in this family. The focus is different characters, so this chapter is really his focus. And so I really enjoyed that. I think in parts, depending on which story you're in, some of the stories are very, very well written, very, very eerie. I think there's a variety in the stories that are told. I think one is almost like a haunted house story. There's another one that's almost like travel to an alternate world, which is really interesting. So I thought that was done really well. I thought the racism elements in the book are handled with varying degrees of success. I think that on the kind of the con side of things, I think that this novel had been a smaller group of characters. I think one of the downsides about the novel is because there are so many different characters, and instead of having like one story told throughout, it being broken up into chapters like the way that it is, some characters kind of become interchangeable in a way that I didn't really get a grasp of their character. And there are just so many characters and so many names that it was really kind of at times difficult to keep a track of them. I think the final chapter tries to kind of tie everything together, and I think it is more or less successful, but I did have a problem with that. I think there's sometimes the novel is really about, like I said, kind of the evils of racism at that time, along with the Lovecraftian horror elements, and there are times where that's really heavy-handed and over the top. When I mean that, I mean characters basically speak in a way that didn't feel realistic to me, as far as giving out history lessons to other characters who would have already had knowledge of these things in kind of unrealistic dialogue. I did like I said, kind of the eerier elements of it. I just wish that instead of having these kind of short chapters, it had been a focus on fewer characters and maybe a longer story. It reminded me a lot, and I'll post a link to this review, of the review I did for The Ballad of Black Tom, because kind of a similar genre of work of kind of not reclaiming Lovecraft, but also kind of tying in some of the viewpoints that H.P. Lovecraft had with kind of his creations or his works. So that was Lovecraft Country. I enjoyed it in certain parts. I maybe had hoped for a different work. I think the structure of it really kind of turned me off. The amount of characters. I kind of found it very much of a slog. I don't think the writing is necessarily bad, but there were a lot of hooks to kind of get me going. It may have been just the subject matter I found kind of off-putting, even though there were some normal cosmic horror stuff. There's a lot of dealing with kind of the racism of the time, and in some ways not necessarily interesting ways. So that's Lovecraft Country. Next time I will be reading The Diviners by Rick Moody. Until next time, please feel free to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and if you have read Lovecraft Country by Matt Ruff, please feel free to leave a comment in the comment section below. Also, like I said, leave a link to The Ballad of Black Tom, because it's, I think, a very similar book to this, with a slightly different take and kind of more of the structure I was looking for, and maybe a little bit more subtlety as far as the themes of racism and things like that. So until next time, bye.